What is up, CR fam? Hope everybody's doing well. We want to say hey to those who are going to be watching this later. I'm Adam. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and drug addiction first brought me to celebrate recovery. Currently working on some pride, self-worth, a little bit of codependency. Hope everybody's doing well.
And my name is Joni. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and codependency first brought me to celebrate recovery, and now I'm working on my anger and control issues.
Hey, Joni.
Hey, Adam.
We made a little mistake, as I'm sure you guys are probably aware by now. We posted on our Facebook page our little flyer. It said it was going to be 8 o'clock.
And then I posted it through the CR page and said 8:30. So we compromised.
Yeah.
And we're here at 8:15.
We want to apologize.
So we're going to give folks some time to join, to jump on and join us, since we have thrown everybody off. We're confused too.
Including ourselves.
Yeah. Luckily, a friend messaged us just a few minutes ago and told us the mistake.
Yeah. So,
where's the comments? Oh, there they are.
There they are. Hope everybody's doing well.
Hey, Kelly.
Hey, Kelly. Hey, Melissa. Hope you guys had a great week and a weekend. So, if there's anything we can help you with, feel free to let us know. Again, we're going to give it a few minutes, let some folks jump on, and then we'll get started.
Normally, though, it tells when people get on.
Yeah.
Hey, Caitlin.
Hey, Caitlin.
It's good to see you. We are looking forward to when we get to go back and see everybody in person, and hopefully that will be sooner than later.
I'm getting excited.
Hey, Candace.
Hey, York. Hope you're doing well. Hey, Candace.
What's up, Paige? I saw earlier today that Paige has a green thumb, so I'm gonna go hang out with her.
Yeah.
Figure out how to keep my plants alive.
We're having issues.
Hey, John.
Hey, John. Hey, Stephanie.
Oh, thank you,
Kelly. Thank you, Kelly. We're having some issues with our garden. The deer like it more than we do right now.
Yeah.
So, we're struggling in that aspect.
And I cannot keep a houseplant alive to save my life. It is just, I want so bad to have a house full of plants, but I struggle. I either water them too much or I don't water them enough, and I cannot seem to find the happy medium. Or they just don't grow. Like, they stay the same size forever. Candace, that's sweet. Thank you.
Hey, Candace, how are you? Hope you're doing well.
Please, Paige, teach me.
Yes.
I was reading your comment today. I was like, okay, let me take note.
Yeah.
Hey, Amanda.
Hey, Amanda.
We went a little earlier tonight since we made a mistake on our flyer.
Yeah.
Put 2 ice cubes in a plate every 7 days and they will be beautiful. Like, what do you mean? Like, pour the ice in a plate. 2 ice cubes in a plate every 7 days.
Absolutely, Caitlin. We hope so as well. Kristen.
Hey, Kristen.
Sorry,
hey, Holly.
Kristen. It's going by quick, so it's hard to read. Hey, Holly.
So.
You can start with
and your plant.
I was trying to figure out. Yeah, I was. Maybe I'm missing something.
Like, maybe I melt them in the plate and then I pour it in. My bad. You're good, Amanda. We were going to take the blame for it.
You're good. We don't.
Hey, TJ.
Hey, TJ.
We're ready to be back, too.
Yes, absolutely. Fortunately, because of Celebrate Recovery, we've learned, Amanda, not to throw our friends under the bus. Yeah. So, you're good.
John said, Adam, hit me up and I'll tell you how to keep deer out of your garden.
Okay, perfect,
Hey, John. I heard one time that I had a client that I cut their hair, and they said if you save hair and put it around the garden, that helps. But I haven't actually tried it in my own garden yet. Hey, Gloria.
Yeah, they're loving the garden right now, John.
Yeah, so. I had 1 tomato and the deer ate it.
It's crazy. I was worried about Japanese beetles because they usually get our roses. And I was like on it with the Japanese beetles this year, and it hadn't even been the Japanese beetles that got it. So
hey, Wanda.
Kind of been thrown for a loop.
Yeah.
But hey, Miss Wanda, hope you're doing well.
So we're glad that you guys joined us tonight. Oh, Candace, does she? I'm gonna try it.
Perfect.
Amanda said, I've learned in CR to take responsibility.
Amen.
John says he knows something better.
Okay,
hey,
perfect.
Miss Tammy.
Hey, Miss
Good
Tammy.
to see you on here tonight. We miss you.
Yes.
All right, so tonight's title is Check Yourself. And we're actually going to be talking about anger. But before we start, we're going to introduce ourselves again. My name is Joni. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. And codependency first brought me to Celebrate Recovery. But now I'm really trying to work on my anger and control issues.
And I'm Adam. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. And drug addiction first brought me to Celebrate Recovery. I'm currently working on some pride, self-worth, and a little bit of codependency. It's awesome to be on here. It's good to see you guys interacting with us. And we're ready. We're ready to be back and see you guys. So we miss you and we love you.
So we're going to continue with starting out by reading the principles, the 8 principles. Number 1, realize I'm not God. I admit that I am powerless to control my tendency to do the wrong thing and that my life is unmanageable. Happy are those who know they are spiritually poor. Matthew 5:3.
Principle 2, earnestly believe that God exists, that I matter to Him, and that He has the power to help me recover. Happy are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Matthew 5:4.
Number 3, consciously choose to commit all my life and will to Christ's care and control. Happy are the meek. Matthew 5:5.
Principle 4, openly examine and confess my faults to myself, to God, and to someone I trust. Happy are the pure in heart. Matthew 5:8.
Number 5, voluntarily submit to every change God wants to make in my life and humbly ask Him to remove my character defects. Happy are those whose greatest desire is to do what God requires. Matthew 5:6.
Principle 6, evaluate all my relationships, offer forgiveness to those who have hurt me, and make amends for harm I've done to others, except when to do so would harm them or others. Happy are the merciful. Matthew 5:7. Happy are the peacemakers. Matthew 5:9.
Number 7, reserve a daily time with God for self-examination, Bible reading, and prayer in order to know God and His will for my life and to gain the power to follow His will.
Happy are those who celebrate recovery.
Woo woo.
And then principle 8. Yield myself to God to be used to bring this good news to others, both by my example and by my words. Happy are those who are persecuted because they do what God requires. Matthew 5:10.
So, like I said, tonight we're talking about anger, and each week we try to be spirit-led, and I feel like maybe God put it on our heart, especially mine, I'll speak for myself, to talk about anger because that is something that I struggle with daily. I think it is a byproduct of my codependency, anger issues. Yes, it could definitely be more than one session. I had to really pick and choose what we talked about because anger can just like branch off into so many different directions. But tonight we're really going to talk about righteous anger versus unrighteous anger. And truly, I chose this message because of my own struggles, and we try to make sure that we are accountable and transparent each week. And so, you know, I felt like this was something I could talk about and maybe learn about too. And then with everything going on in the world, it just all seemed to tie together. So I did research, and I came with some of my own life experience with anger. And I already knew this, but anger is a secondary emotion. It's a mask that we use to protect ourselves or to cover up, you know, our vulnerability so that we don't have to deal with our primary feelings like fear, hurt, pain, disappointment, rejection, frustration, anxiety. And I think this hit me earlier when I was reflecting. I think something that comes with anger, for me especially, is pride.
Yeah.
And anger is a protector of our raw feelings. And like I said, when I was doing research, I came across this analogy. And it was talking about an iceberg and how an iceberg is like anger. An iceberg, you know, when you see it, most of it is hidden beneath the surface, and anger's like that also. It's easy to see a person's anger, but it can be really difficult to see what other underlying feelings the anger's covering up for somebody. And that really sums me up. I use anger to pretty much mask every other emotion that I feel, whether it be anxiety. Fear is a big one for me, disappointment. And I've talked about this previously, and how I guess somewhere along the way I just learned that it was weak it made me uncomfortable to show my true emotions. So anger is just like a go-to for every emotion I experience. But righteous anger versus unrighteous anger. In John 2:13-22, I'm going to read that. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found men selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple area, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. How dare you turn my Father's house into a market?" His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." So that is an example. There's at least 3 other examples in the Bible of Jesus getting angry. And so I wanted to talk about that because I think that for Christians especially, it's hard to admit that you deal with anger because we associate that as it's a sin, but it's really not a sin to get angry. Jesus was angry, God gets angry, but it's what we do with our anger that turns it into sin. Righteous anger focuses on God and his kingdom. It focuses on God's concerns. Righteous anger reacts against actual sin. And I think that really relates to what's going on right now with the state that our world is in, our country's in, and with racism. You know, it is the right reaction to be angry about racism. It's what we do with that anger towards racism that determines whether or not it's righteous anger or unrighteous anger. Righteous anger seeks restoration, whereas unrighteous anger seeks destruction. So that's a big difference. And that's where we have to ask ourselves, am I trying to hurt someone because they've hurt me? Or am I seeking resolve? Righteous anger is accompanied by godly qualities and expresses itself in godly ways. So righteous anger is kind. It's love. Righteous anger remains self-controlled. Unrighteous anger is basically the opposite of all of those things. But the majority of the anger that we experience is unrighteous or fleshly anger. So for me, well, I listened to a podcast this week and it happened to be on anger. So then I just felt like God was confirming that we were definitely speaking about what he intended for us to speak about. And it was Gary Chapman. And I laugh, but it's really true. He said he never really got angry until he got married. And then he said, and I never got really angry until I had a teenage son. I don't have a teenage son yet, but I think really that rings true for having children. And so a lot of my anger issues happen within you know, the walls of my home. And I imagine a lot of you experience the same thing. We tend to take our anger out on the people that we love the most, but it has surprised me when I came to Celebrate Recovery because I carried so much shame over my anger and the way that I had the potential to lash out and still have the potential to lash out, if I'm being honest. So it surprised me when I met how many people I met that actually struggled with anger. But as we dig in, we find that there's much deeper roots like self-worth and fear. But we become upset regarding the areas that we're most passionate about. So I believe that explains why we struggle so much with anger with our spouses and our children. I think everybody wants to be a good parent, but it's really hard for us to help our kids work through their anger if we haven't learned how to deal with our own anger. And as much as I wanted to be the perfect mother, I am in some ways what I've been taught, and now it's up to me to seek healing and allow God to really work and transform me. And I know that if anger is left undealt with, it turns into rage and bitterness. So we really have to be careful that we deal with our anger, because we either suppress it. Some people are really good at suppressing their anger, but ultimately sometimes they become depressed, anxious, and then other people lash out and
like
become
myself.
And myself, I don't suppress it at all. Sometimes I could, and I think it's a balance of trying to know, learning when to suppress and when to talk. And one of the biggest things I've learned recently, because like I said, it's my parenting, my angry parenting, that's one of the things I hate the most. Because I know that if I don't help my children, then they're going to grow. If I don't do it different, they're going to grow up to be angry adults, angry parents also. And I've even recently, and this is completely transparent, but my oldest, my 9-year-old, he is a little bit stubborn, and he got it honest. So he will take things that I tell him to do, and he'll twist and mold them to be what he wants them to be. So then when I come back and I say, hey, did you do such and such? He's like, yeah, but he only did part of it. And so I was edgy and frustrated, and I was at him, and he got angry with me, and he came back at me with anger. And I was like, whoa, who do you think you are speaking to me that way? And deep down, every time now that I do it, I feel the conviction of the Holy Spirit. I just am not sure yet. It's getting better, but it's not completely gone. And so I'm convicted, but I'm telling him, like, how dare you get angry at me? And he says to me, look at you. And I was like, oh man. I even told Adam about it because it hit me in the gut. Like, okay, so now we're at a place where he sees that his mother's angry, and, so it's up to me. And so right now I'm just doing what I can to try to get better. And I'll let Adam talk, and then we're going to talk about the things that I've found that we can do to try to find freedom from our anger.
And that I'm sitting here in deep thought about what you just shared, and that's probably one of the reasons why Johnny and I had such a hard time with each other, is because we were paying each other, anger for anger. I saw her doing it, or vice versa. She saw me doing it. The light bulb kind of went off when you were talking about Davis right then, even though we had talked about it prior to. But one thing you did say, when you started, I've been through a few studies now, and I've never really thought about it like this, but you said anger is a protector of our own feelings. And I've always lashed out, which I'll get into in a minute, but as you said that, and that's the beautiful thing about Celebrate Recovery, is you go in there and you hear anger, resentment, fear, guilt, shame, remorse, whatever the case may be. And it's not strictly drug addiction or alcoholism. So you hear anger, and you hear people sharing, and a light bulb goes off, and you say, hey, look, that's kind of like what I'm going through right there. But to get back to what you had said, anger being a protector of our own feelings, as I heard you say that, and I started reflecting back, on all the times that I had been hurt, I could see that I used anger, when my feelings were hurt. Instead of telling someone, like, hey, you hurt my feelings, I used it. That was my go-to. But,
and that's part of codependency.
Yeah, and I get into that too. But,
okay.
But that really spoke to me quite a bit, because I had never thought about it from that aspect of, not necessarily from the codependent side, but it was like my go-to. As soon as I got upset or, offended, I went to anger. And I knew I've always had anger issues, and I knew that anger is something that I've had been struggling with and currently struggle with, if I'm being honest with you, on a daily basis. Psalm 37:8 says, "Don't give in to worry or anger. It only leads to trouble." And anger is something, if I'm being honest, that I gave into more so than my drug addiction. And what I mean by that is I've had some success with my drug addiction, but I still struggle with anger. Anger did lead me to take some, paths that led to my addiction. But anger is something that I have to stay on top of just as much as my addiction, because it's just that important, because it can ruin our relationship. Like we get angry with each other. I don't want to tell them how often, but we do get angry. We do get angry with each other, and we have to work on that constantly. It's a daily thing, that we have to constantly work on. And as I look back over my addiction and over the past, 20 years or so, I see the expectations played a huge role with my anger. When I felt like someone was not meeting my expectations, I always felt justified in lashing out. And that's the sad part about having expectations is the person you have expectations of doesn't even know that you have those expectations. So when you do lash out, they have no idea why you're lashing out or why you're angry. So expectations, let me tell you, has gotten me in trouble so many times and gotten me into some very bad places, especially throughout my addiction. And the key word here is when I felt like they had done something wrong or not met my expectations. And the problem there is anger for me is a very selfish and self-centered character defect that I have. And again, it's not until I had to, really call out those character defects as I worked through a step study that I realized that it was one of the, leading factors in my addiction. But I never once, throughout my entire addiction, and I still struggle with it now, if I'm being honest, I have a hard time checking myself, to see my true motives. And why it is that I'm getting angry at that person or why I'm having these expectations of that person. And, because of those expectations, with my anger, it has caused so many problems in my life with friendships, family, and, more importantly, our marriage. I'll give you a good example of how expectations and anger has ruined a lot for me. Like I got a job as I was working as a framer, so I was, I was on a crew. I was a metal stud framer, and one of my uncles, Joni's uncle, who was my boss, at the time, he was my boss before we got together. Long story short, we got married. He's her uncle, so he was my boss, and because of that, I had expectations that I should move up in the company, but truth be told, I really wasn't any better framer than anybody else. And, because I was married to his niece, maybe I thought there was I had an expectation to move up. And, what happens when he doesn't meet that expectation, and truth, it has nothing to do with him. He's not the owner of the company, so I shouldn't have looked at him and had that expectation of him. But what happened is I found another job as a higher up position, and when I told him about it, he kind of put me in check. I'm being honest. He was like, you need to work on some things that, before you go in, because this job has a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of things there's a lot of moving pieces. And I got angry with him. And, because I felt like I had that expectation to move up with the company and I hadn't, I felt it was okay. And I justified my anger by lashing out at him, and it has caused a tremendous amount of, strife in our relationship since, and that was like 4 years ago, and that's one of the examples that I can give you of how expectations and anger has, really ruined some relationships for me. Even though we can make amends for these things, you can't, it's hard to take back things you say to people in anger. And I can tell you that I've said some very hurtful things because of my anger issues, you know. Ephesians 4:26 says, if you become angry, do not let your anger lead you to sin, and do not stay angry all day. That last one got me there, the last part of that verse, you know, about staying angry all day, because I would stay angry for weeks, y'all. I'm just being honest, especially when Joni and I were going through some issues, you know, a lot of issues throughout my addiction, you know, like I just stayed angry, you know. It was so hard to get out of that cycle because we couldn't get past the anger. And, you know, we'd I would stay angry for weeks on end about the smallest thing, you know, and I couldn't let it go. I felt justified that because of that anger had become righteous anger, which led me to abuse friendships, my relationship with my wife, and drugs. I can tell you that once your anger becomes righteous anger, or what you think is righteous anger, it makes it that much harder to see the real truth. And what I mean by that is because, in my opinion, when it becomes, you know, righteous anger is so easily justified. You think you're right. At least I did. You know, I always thought I was right. And that's one of the scary things about righteous anger is I felt justified. So I didn't really feel like there was a need to look for the real truth. I thought I knew the real truth, if that makes any sense.
Self-righteous anger.
Self-righteous.
When you're
yes.
centered everything around yourself.
Yes. That's a good way of putting it. Checking yourself and your actions. You know, especially in my case, they took a back seat. Because, you know, I felt so justified with that behavior, that self-righteous behavior, as Johnny said, and that's a good way of putting it. I like that.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Glad I could help.
That self-righteous anger led me to lashing out, which, you know, ruined so many relationships. And fortunately, I don't let them get like that today. Thankful for CR and God, but you know, anger still, you know, it can rear its ugly head at any point throughout the day. Bad language became the norm for me. And I was just angry all the time. You know, like, especially before I went to jail and rehab, you know, it seems like we both were just extremely angry with each other.
Yeah,
Joni had, you know, she had quit drinking and smoking, and I was continuing to do that. And there was just, I expected her to understand, and she expected me to stop and understand why I should stop. And it's just expectations, man. It was terrible. It was such a terrible time because it got to the point where, you know, I was hiding alcohol, you know, drinking on the way home from work, and then obviously smelling like alcohol. You know, I had quit my drug use at this point, but, you know, because of that, there was so much anger throughout our first year of marriage, and, you know, that's probably been one of the happiest times of your life, you know, and we put ourselves through the ringer. A lot of it to do with myself, and then, you know, I start lashing out because I'm been drinking alcohol. It's just a terrible combination. I'm getting kind of...
Well, Adam saying that, that was something that I had thought of earlier, and I didn't say it. Especially when you're struggling with an addict or any kind of compulsive behavior. Yes, I think when we're talking about righteous anger, you can be angry at the sin. You can be angry that someone is hurting you, but a big turning point for me and I believe that's where my recovery started, is realizing that no matter what he did, as awful as some of the things were that I felt like they were horrible, I still had a choice in how I reacted. Now, I know that's easier said than done, and I'd love to sit here and tell you that I know that in some ways I would do it different, but I know in some ways I would fail if I had to do it again. So I don't judge anyone else for that, but I still had to take responsibility for the fact that I had a choice in how I treated him based on the decisions he was making and the sins that he was committing against me and our marriage and the ways he was breaking my trust. And when Adam was talking about anger and how many relationships that anger had ruined for him or caused problems in, that was another thing that, crossed my mind in preparing for tonight, was that there are two things that I can pretty almost solely contribute so many relationships ending or being tainted, and that's anger and alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So.
And I can tell you, being totally transparent, Joni and I have said the most hurtful things to each other and done the most hurtful things to each other while under the influence of alcohol and anger. Those two.
That for me, alcohol intensified my anger, and I think that's when I know there are people that can have a drink and everything's all good, but there's just some of us that can't. And when we accepted that, I mean, that has tremendously helped us.
Yeah, and I can tell you too, that once I had left Joni and was homeless, and kind of on the run and running from drug house to drug house, and she started to change, and that's when our whole relationship truly changed, because she wasn't getting mad at me anymore. And I recognize this, there were times where Joni came and found me at a drug house, and I'll be honest, I was very, very mean, and, in a nice way, I asked her, what are you doing here? Why are you here following me? And she just I'm checking on you. And that, for me, that was kind of like the turning point, because she had accepted the fact to not let that anger, lead her into a place where she knew ultimately that I would lash back out at her, because we couldn't get out of that cycle. She get angry at me, I get angry at her. And that was probably which it was the final straw for me, because it was my rock bottom. But, I can remember that being something that I kind of turned my head at, why isn't she getting mad? Running into her at Walmart, and I'm trying to steal things to stay, warm because it's freezing. And she's like, so what are you doing? And she's just like, what are you doing? Not get mad. And I couldn't figure it out, but I now see. So maybe you were leading me on the right way.
Maybe.
But as I worked through, as I finally got into Celebrate Recovery and worked through those step studies, I saw that getting angry and lashing out at others, if I'm being honest, was just a way to express how I felt about myself. I'm a self-worth and pride guy. And it's like I was telling a guy last night that I was talking with, I squandered a lot, of my talent and, ability. And by doing that, I had to go out into the real world, and find a job and work and, try to make ends meet. So, for me, that was a big hit for my self-worth, because I always saw myself growing up being something, being rich or being a baseball player. And here I am, a drug addict at 24 years old, just finished college baseball. So I had a terrible self-worth issue. And that's really when as I thought about this lesson and looked back over those years, that's when a lot of my lashing out happened, especially with my friends. Because a lot of them at this point were doing stuff with, for themselves. They were moving on in life. They were getting married. They were having kids. They had good jobs. And here I am stuck, making hardly any money, living in a house that, we inherited, and, just barely making ends meet. And that's when I started lashing out at them. And as I worked through the step studies, I realized it was because of the way I felt about myself. I was unhappy with myself. And, just the overall direction that I was taking in life, I think, is why I became angry with everyone, including my parents. I was very much enabled, not to get into a whole lot of that, but, lived in a house that we had inherited, and because of that direction I was taking, I was enabled, so I depended a lot on my parents, and as much as they did, I still lashed out at them and said very hurtful things at them because of the way I felt about myself. It's very sad as I think about it now, but the way I treated them, and I treated all my friends like that, because of that way I felt about myself. Where there's anger, there's always pain underneath. And, that was the main problem with my anger, is there was so much pain underneath that I caused myself. Also, my codependency let a lot of that righteous anger come out, or made me feel like I was justifying that righteous anger because, there were times where people would say things to me or do things to me, and instead of telling that person, like how I felt, like we talked about earlier, you may have hurt my feelings, I kind of would shrug it off. And the problem with that is they don't know they hurt your feelings. So what happens is that creates kind of in my case, it was kind of like a joking atmosphere where it started to come up more often. And what I did was I bottled it up. And, until eventually you can't take no more. And you lash out, you have these crazy outbursts. And then you end up looking crazy. And that's what happened. And it happened in our marriage as well, like I was so bad at keeping things bottled up. And then, like, your delivery. My delivery would be so wrong that they wouldn't even know what I was talking about because I'd be hooping and hollering, angry, and they would be like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, you did this 6 months ago. And so that's where a lot of my codependency brought forth some of that self-righteous anger. It did, a lot of the stuff. Trying to reconnect. Okay, perfect. Sorry, our phone said we were trying to reconnect. But that codependency, and I still struggle with it too. It led me to not say anything, and I struggle with it. And Joni has to put me in check. My sponsor has to put me in check. I
think we're good.
Are we good? Can you guys understand?
Can you hear us?
Our internet's cutting out. Everybody there?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. My codependency led me not to say anything because of that fear that I would hurt someone's feelings. But ultimately, all it did was hurt myself in the long run. I used this tactic with Joni, in our marriage for the first few years. Joni, I would never, when she would say something to me or try to keep me in check, I would never say, like, that may have hurt my feelings. And it's not that she was riding me or anything. She just wanted the best for me, as I now know. But I bottled it up, and then eventually what happened? It exploded. And then she wouldn't even know what I was talking about. Because I'd be acting like a fool, wouldn't I?
Not you, babe.
Not me. And then when we would argue, or after all, like, some of the things that she had told me, she would share things with me, and like maybe she put someone in check in her family. She would say, hey, I don't like the way that makes me feel. Or, Dad, you really hurt my feelings. Or whatever the case may be, just using that as an example. And, she would come to me and say, well, what do you think? Should I have said anything? And I'd be like, yeah, you're good, you're good. I would have said the same thing. And then we'd get in an argument 2 weeks later, and I'd bring it up. And I'd be like, you know what? This is why nobody likes you.
Yes, he would.
Because you ride everyone. You ride me, and this is why nobody likes you, is because you're so hard on everybody. And that is a prime example of my codependency taking over, because I wouldn't tell her, look, you probably shouldn't have said that, Joni. Even though I probably agree with you with what you said and putting that person in check or whoever it was, I didn't say that. And, I would let my anger, and then in return, she'd be like, I feel like I can't tell you anything. And she wouldn't trust me to tell me some things that were bothering her. So my codependency and anger has played a huge role, not only in my relationship, but our relationship as well. I rationalize all this as righteous anger, especially with Joni and I, my codependency. Self-righteous. So she's whispering self-righteous anger. You're right. I'm gonna have to put
issues,
I'm gonna have to put it in my notes.
Well, okay.
But honestly, was it really self-righteous anger? You know, that's the question. I'm maybe preaching to myself here. And the best way to do that for me is I have to check my attitude, check my motives behind those decisions and behaviors I make. And I struggle with anger every day. So it's a process. I take it one day at a time.
Yes, I struggle with anger every day as well. Adam and I still have moments. People ask us. I think that's the hard part about, being ministry leaders is sometimes people think that, like, our life is perfect now. And it's not perfect. We're just intentional. And when we fail, we get up, we ask for each other's forgiveness. Adam sometimes is better at that than I am. And we ask for God's forgiveness. And I think that is all you can do, is you just have to keep being intentional. You have to keep getting up. You have to keep showing up. And if you struggle with anger, I can tell you that just because you're aware of it, and if you tonight choose to pray about it, it doesn't mean that tomorrow you're not going to struggle. It's just going to, a friend of mine and I always say hard and holy. Like, you have to do hard and holy things. You have to make decisions every day of your life, of your walk with Christ, to continue to get better. And so I have written down a few things that I think are things that we can do to try to find freedom from our anger. The first thing, try not to take it personally. When another person, and even with, this is a hard one for me, but I used to have no awareness, and now that I do it, it does help me. Most of the time when other people get angry, it's about, like Adam said, it's about how they feel about themselves, or especially because so many people struggle with codependency, people struggle with boundaries, especially if you've been someone who hasn't set boundaries previously, but now you're deciding that, you're trying to live differently. So you set boundaries and you tell the truth. There is nothing wrong with telling the truth.
Speaking the truth in love. You
can speak the truth in love, and you should speak the truth in love, but be prepared that it's gonna make people mad. But then that's still not your responsibility, and that's something that I've had to learn, and that's been really hard for me with some relationships, some very close, even family relationships that I've had. I've told the truth, and I've lovingly told the truth. And, the dynamic of that relationship used to be where we both lashed out at each other. But now I am determined that I want to represent God and His love and His ability to transform to the people, that I know need it, and that I want to see that. So it's not easy, because I have to make a choice to fight through. And so I have had these conversations and gotten my feelings so hurt, y'all. And I mean hurt. And this one specific time comes to mind where a family member of mine, I spoke truth in love, and I set a boundary, and they lashed out at me so terribly and said some of the most hurtful things. And I walked out. And I that was rare. Used to, I would have lashed out right back, and I left, and I came home, and I lost it. I cried, and I broke something. I mean, but that was a huge victory. And even though, like, I broke something, and I cried until I really couldn't cry anymore, I kept from sinning against that person. So, realizing we just have to realize that like that person, their anger was more about how they felt, their issues, not me. It wasn't at all about me. And it's easy to become defensive, which never diffuses the issue, but we can try to become curious as to why someone else is lashing out in anger. And especially going through CR, when you start to realize that everyone struggles with something, you really can start to, as you interact with people, you realize, okay, you know, like I can see that there's some trust issues there, or I can see that, you know, such and such might be struggling with some self-worth issues. The next tip, this is especially, Adam and I struggled with this. Don't minimize someone else's feelings when they are angry.
I used to tell Johnny all the time, you know, calm down.
Oh,
and it never
on a chalkboard
helped.
to me.
But I don't understand why you're crying so much, you know? I don't understand why you're mad. Calm down. And that never helps. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it hit home when you said that, because
when you say, yeah, he did. And
I always tried to minimize it.
It was like pouring kerosene on my fire.
It was terrible.
And then I just lost it, which was still, that was my responsibility. I still had a choice. And when you tell someone to calm down or not to overreact, that's saying to them, your feelings don't matter. And truly, all of us, I don't care who you are, everybody wants their feelings validated. Number 3, this is one that this is a tactic I use because it's all I know. Admit it when you've blown it. I do this especially. I don't do it as much in my marriage. That's me being transparent. But I do this a lot in parenting because I don't know how to automatically stop parenting in anger sometimes. But I do know how I've learned how to apologize and to admit when I'm wrong. And I think it's important to apologize to who your anger has hurt, and to ask God for forgiveness for sinning against that person. And so, like, with my kids, even my little one that's 3.5, you know, if I yell, I yell. And I know that you shouldn't yell at your kids, but I yell. And if I yell and I can see it hurts her feelings, it breaks my heart. And I tell her, Mommy is sorry. Mommy should not have yelled. And, you know, my oldest one, I can talk even more in depth with him about it. And I'll tell him, buddy, like what you did, it disappointed me. However, I had control over how I handled that, and I could have chose differently, and I'm sorry. So, I mean, I feel like that is one of the best ways to find freedom, is to own it. Just own it. And then number 4, I heard this in the podcast. So this was actually a recommendation by Gary Chapman, but find ways to work around your triggers, like identify your triggers and work around them. You know, and find a mechanism to stop it. So he suggested, I mean, you can pray. I do that. You can count. I haven't counted. I could probably find better mechanisms, but I have identified some of my triggers. One of my biggest triggers for anger is fear and anxiety. When we travel, I get really anxious, and
You should tell them about the mountains. She does. Traveling is not her thing.
Traveling is not my thing because I have so much anxiety and control issues. I worry too much about what could happen, and that's a whole nother message for another night. But identifying it helps me be aware of it and helps me to be more intentional.
It sure does.
I get a lot of anxiety about being late. So, you know, I'm very intentional with my time. I make sure that I allow myself plenty of time, because if I start running late, I get anxious and I get angry.
And then we start arguing because I get anxious about being late because we're very punctual people.
Yeah. So, and the last one, get to the root. When you figure out what the root of your anger is, you can better deal with it. You can find those mechanisms, and a great way to get to the root of it is attend Celebrate Recovery, get plugged into a share group, and work a step study. The step study was the biggest one because it laid it all out. It talked about every little detail of what, you know, rooted what the roots of my anger were. So it really helped me to at least, you know, identify it, because if you're in denial, you're stuck. And as long as you're not stuck, there's hope. And then, you know, like we said a couple weeks ago, you have to celebrate the small victories, like
Amen.
Apologizing when you do blow it.
That's a huge victory.
It is a huge victory, because my pride used to keep me in this place of, I'm not apologizing because I don't want to, you know, I don't want to look wrong.
Yeah.
And so that was a recent thing that,
It was
you know,
vulnerability, you know, apologizing. It shows vulnerability.
even to kids, like, you know, you think that you're going to, like, look inferior, but one of the things I realized, actually, Gary Chapman said this, and it resonated with me. He said, you know, because when Davis looked at me and said, look at you, you know, you're angry. I knew right then that I needed to check myself, and I needed to chill, and I needed to zip my lips, but I didn't. I said, take your tail to your room. Don't talk to me that way. And then I sat there and I was like, oh, Lord, I've blown it, you know? And so Gary Chapman said, we think as parents, we need to, like, flex our muscles and show our authority. And so we send them to their room because they're angry, and that's supposed to help. But we think they're going to respect us less if we admit that we're wrong, but no, you send them to their room, they don't respect you anymore, and they know that what you did was wrong. So at least by apologizing to your children, this is my hope and belief that I'm teaching him how to deal with the rest of the world, how to forgive people that don't deserve forgiveness, and, you know, just how to, you know, be the kind of person that is tolerant of other people. A lot better than me. You know, I'm having to work really hard, and so I just really want to show him, because you never really get to deal with people that are easy. That's a rarity. So, you know, I'm just hopeful that it's a good life lesson for him.
That's a good word.
So yeah, guys, that's what we got for tonight on anger.
Absolutely. I want to encourage you guys too. You know, we're hopefully going to be starting back within the next little bit. There already are some CRs that have started back, so I want you guys to be preparing yourselves, you know, and what you can do to figure out those underlying issues and to make, you know, this recovery a much easier process for you. I would definitely be thinking about a step study once we start back, you know, and not, if you watch and you go somewhere else to another CR, that's completely okay, but I strongly encourage you, you know, to get into a step study. You know, none of our CRs are, you know, in competition with each other, so
go somewhere.
Yeah, go somewhere.
Go to Temple.
You know,
Temple's back.
awesome,
go to Temple on Friday
know?
night, and when we start back, come on Monday night.
Absolutely. You know, and we have people from Temple that come there, and vice versa. We have people from JMC that go to Temple. I strongly recommend it. You know, like, if you've been through a step study, you know, there's nothing wrong with getting in another one. I heard John at Temple, John Eklund, say that he, at one point, this was a year or so ago, he'd been through 12 step studies, you know, and I thought that was crazy. Like, that, you know, if anybody, you would think, you know.
It's always.
But it never hurts. It never hurts. So be thinking about that, you know, as we start to gear back up. You know, what can you do to, you know, help yourself in your recovery? We continue to pray for you guys. We love you guys. If there's anything that we can help you guys with, feel free to reach out to us. JohnnyCR@jmcexperience.org and AdamCR@jmcexperience.org. We are always here for you guys. We'll try to be as punctual as possible with the emails. But, you know, if you need something, please let us know. We'll pray for you guys before we end.
You want to read the Serenity Prayer and I'll pray?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll read the Serenity Prayer and Johnny will pray. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen.
All right. Father, we thank you so much for who you are and for this day, God. I thank you for everything you do for us. Lord, I thank you for each person that showed up tonight, God. I just pray for chains to be broken, for freedom to be found, God. I pray for our country and everything that's going on, Lord. I pray for unity in our country and our churches and our homes, God. I pray that you just help each of us continue to follow you and give us the wisdom and the courage that we need, God. We love you. We thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. We love you guys. If you need something, let us know. And we hope you guys have a great week.
Yep.
We look forward to seeing y'all next Monday.
See ya.